The individual human being as a object of study, right? And immediately adjacent to that, lifting up the individual human being as the most important moral, social, cultural, political unit, as the primary moral, social, political, cultural unit in the cosmos. Right? What do I mean by that? To just very briefly, modern term, Machiavelli or Montaigne or Locke or Rousseau or Mill, all of these folks, and I think you can pretty easily see that they were deeply interested in individual person and how the individual works and how individual identity can be endowed, can be talked about, can be defined. They do it in different ways, but the individual is the central object of study for all of those things. That's characteristic of the modern project or of the Enlightenment project in sum. Or Locke's idea, okay, now let's go inside the human mind and understand understanding, and spill a lot of ink and resources over studying the individual. Now, when you get into the middle of the 18th century, never mind the 19th century when Mill is writing, now you have a fully articulated idea about the individual as having a birthright liberty. And by the time you get to Mill, you have all of those authoritarian structures, all of those traditional systems of authority shaken in pretty serious ways, including shaken to the ground by political revolution. And so now you have the need for political theories designed actually to lift that individual up as the primary commitment of society. Right? So Rousseau talks about ensuring the endurance without any loss of individual freedom in a world in which authority has been shaken to the ground, right? And so for him, it's about rebuilding society, about rebuilding the self. The individual is understandable, right? I mean, that's what Montaigne said. Montaigne said, if we're going to understand it, we got to do this. That seems to carry with it an assumption that it was doable, right? Locke published a book this thick about understanding. So he ultimately culminated with the idea that with an assertion that the self is that conscious thinking thing. So he clearly thinks the self is knowable.
He said, if I make up the definition of a mammal, and then I can expect an account and declare, look, a mammal, I have indeed brought a truth to light in this way, but it is a truth of limited value. And it's sort of like
taking on questions that we've been looking at for a long time now, right? About the nature of truth and about the fundamental role of language in constructing truth, right?
Nietzsche seems to be saying, I'm on the first page, where he says, one might invent such a fable and so on, illustrating sufficiently how wretched, how shadowy and flighty, how aimless and arbitrary the human intellect appears in nature. So he's talking about how, he doesn't agree that we can know what the self is.
He sure doesn't. He doesn't think the self is a knowable thing. This is a bomb to throw in the middle of a smattering of Enlightenment or Enlightenment-influenced text. More clearly, at the bottom of the first page, he says, "What indeed does man know of himself?" can he even once perceive himself completely laid out as if in an illuminated glass case? Who is he poking fun at right there? Who might he be poking fun at when he says, man isn't an illuminated glass case? Who's kind of closest to that language in describing the human being as a case? Locke. An individual is a cabinet filled with understandings, and then he goes in and studies different understandings. Nietzsche is like, that's not what the human being is. That's not what the self is. You can't know. You can't. It's not a process by which you walk up, you get a view of the case, and now you know the truth of the individual. Here, he's specifically at times poking fun of different people. In some remote corner of the universe, poured out and glittering in innumerable solar systems, there once was a star on which clever animals invented knowledge. That was the highest and most mendacious minute of world history. What does mendacious mean? You have to a rough start in understanding what he's saying if you went with that. The most deceptive, lying, false moment in human history. The idea of history itself is a human invention. The Enlightenment, and modernity, by some estimations, began when humans figured out that the world didn't revolve around the earth. I mean, that the cosmos didn't revolve around the earth. And breaking out of the chains, stepping out of the caves of ignorance, it just proceeded, humans have just proceeded to create another big illusion, another cave a cave of ignorance in which they dwell, composed of stories, composed of myths, composed of images, composed of words. This one says that the cosmos revolves around the individual. And before that, let me ask you, what does Freud say about memory and forgetting? Where does he talk about memory and forgetting? Does he think that forgetting things, that willful forgetting is possible? No, right? Kelsey, no.
No.
But where else did you talk about this? I mean, what's a Freudian slip? A Freudian slip is when you say something not intentionally, but it's because something you really want to say comes up out of your unconscious. That thinking of oneself as an artist is threatening within the context of the Western tradition. The way out of this cave-making impulse is to acknowledge that that's what we do, and seize upon the identity of artists. See that the only thing that is real is what we intuit and create, that we take the stuff of the cosmos, including language, meaning, images, and we cobble them together on a constantly changing basis, tearing down and rebuilding, tearing down and rebuilding.
I still don't understand how Nietzsche comes to the conclusion of the more knowledge you know, the thicker the walls get in prison. I don't understand why the walls.
Okay, because I didn't do a good job of that either. I mean, if Plato says, okay, there's a cave, right, and you get out of the cave, right? Nietzsche is saying that within sort of that sort of idea, which basically animates all of the Enlightenment too, which is that through knowledge we get outside of the cave, we get outside of the walls. Nietzsche is adding this whole other wrinkle to it, which is that we've gotten so accustomed to this worldview that when we do get out here, we think we're free. But really what that is now we're in an even bigger cave with thicker walls, because we've been hoodwinked by the stories we've been telling for 2,500 years. We've hoodwinked ourselves into thinking that this existence is not static, There is no stasis. Life is constant change. But by the time we get to 14, he's describing this. In this way, there is, for the first time, set over against the ego an object, the breast, in the form of something which exists outside, and which is only forced to appear by a special action, crying, screaming. That's what makes the object appear. A further incentive to a disengagement of the ego from the general mass of sensations, that is, the recognition of an outside, an external world, is provided by the frequent, manifold, and unavoidable sensation of pain and unpleasure, the removal and avoidance of which is enjoined by the pleasure principle. We'll get to that. The other is worth noting back on 13, the hunger that humans have for pursuing that sense of oneness, unification. For Freud, this is how he understands sexuality too. What is the highest form of human pleasure? It is what he says, that rare moment. There is only one state, top of 13, admittedly an unusual state, but not one that can be stigmatized as pathological, in which it does not do this. Two really important things, and we'll leave on this point. What are those two things, Kelsey?
To avoid displeasure and to seek pleasure.
Right. The pleasure principle, to get pleasure and to avoid pleasure. This is the way, in his observation, this is what people are out to do. Get pleasure and avoid pain. Okay, so read the rest of this. We'll spend all of our time right there. Then there are fighting words.